Hello guys, in this video I'll be talking about a problem at Newton South High School. This is also a problem at many high schools in the surrounding region, but in this video I will be focusing on Newton South High School in particular because that is the high school I attended. If you look at Newton South from the outside, you'll see one of the most affluent, well-resourced, and competitive public high schools in the region. But beneath the surface, the school's internal architecture is causing a host of hidden problems and making the academic playing field fundamentally unfair for a vast majority of students. Today, we are taking an investigative look at what I call the capacity deficit, how artificial bottlenecks, poor resource allocation, and systemic scheduling gatekeeping actively restrict academic potential of the students there. As some of you probably already know, Newton South has an insane problem of AP limitations, but that should really not be the case because a highly functioning public high school should let students take classes that match their actual abilities. But instead of doing that, Newton South operates on a system of artificial limitations, in particular, restricting access based on a student's age rather than their readiness. Interestingly, there's a paradox here. High schools located near elite universities with intense academic cultures are counterintuitively much more likely to impose strict AP limitations than schools located in areas with lower levels of academic culture. I will make a separate video explaining exactly why that paradox exists, but for today, let's focus on how this restriction actually operates inside the building of Newton South. Let's look at the current situation going on there. For freshmen, there is an absolute blanket ban on advanced placement enrollment, meaning you can be an extremely smart freshman going there, and you will still not be allowed to enroll in any AP courses because of this arbitrary rule. For sophomores, there is a near absolute ban. The only exception is that sophomores can take AP World Languages. However, very few people that are a sophomore can actually skip to an AP World Language because they would need to know a foreign language at a proficient level by the time they are a sophomore. And it also must be a language that actually has an AP option. So as you can see, given how AP World Language is the only exception and how few people can actually take an AP World Language as a sophomore, this means that very few people below the junior year take APs at all at Newton South. When students hit their junior year, which is already late into high school, they still face extremely limited AP choices. It's important to look at what the historical reality at Newton South was before the recent catalog expansion of APs for juniors. I also want to define what I mean here by normal circumstances. So the way I define normal circumstances for juniors is if a student has not skipped a particular grade in any particular subject, and if the student has not been given a rare special prerequisite exemption by any department, and if the student has not had any special external transfer credit, which represents the vast majority of students at Newton South. So, for the vast majority of juniors before the AP expansion, the only AP options available to them were AP Chemistry, AP US History, and AP Statistics. But these options were only available on paper. These APs sometimes required prerequisites, and sometimes to a borderline unreasonable level during sophomore year, or strict teacher recommendations to qualify. Meaning, for many juniors who didn't get those recommendations or complete the somewhat unnecessary prerequisites during their sophomore year, it was actually less than 3 choices. A lot of juniors do not take any APs simply because they didn't have any realistically available to them back then, or the few that were available to them was not what they were interested in taking. Recently, the school tried to expand options by theoretically allowing juniors to take AP US Government, AP Human Geography, and AP African American Studies. But this is still highly insufficient. These new additions operate on a specific policy where seniors are prioritized, meaning juniors only get the leftover seats, if there are any leftover seats in these classes at all. Furthermore, the prerequisites for the original 3 APs historically available for juniors have not changed much, if at all, and are still somewhat unreasonable and restrictive. As you can see, rather than addressing the root problem, which is the configuration and the prerequisites, the school just simply added a few more AP classes that are senior prioritized. It is a highly insufficient solution. To understand how illogical these barriers are, let's use the science sequence as an example. Sure, there are several other subject sequences we can talk about, but I can discuss those in a future video, and let's focus on the science sequence here because the science situation is very simple to explain. At Newton South, there is a mandated track where freshmen must take physics, sophomore must take chemistry, and juniors must take biology. Because of this rigid sequence, an AP Science generally can never be taken during freshman or sophomore year. AP Chemistry is available only starting junior year for students that manage to qualify during their sophomore year, leaving AP Biology locked away entirely until senior year. The bigger structural failure here is that poor configuration and an insufficient number of available class sections cause a seat shortage. Despite only 2 grades having access to AP Chemistry and only 1 grade having access to AP Biology, there is still a shortage for both AP courses. I'll explain more about the structural and design flaw of science at Newton South in a moment, but right now I also need to point out how this science sequence is really unnecessary. You do not strictly need to take the regular or non-AP science class to do well in the AP science class. While it is true that not everyone would be able to take the AP Science class without first taking the regular non-AP version, but it is also true that many students can in theory take the AP Science class and skip the non-AP entirely. That is literally the case at so many less restrictive high schools. Capable students that can take the AP Science class directly should really not be forced to waste an entire year taking a class they do not need to and should instead be allowed to get started on the AP Science class earlier. When people ask why these restrictions exist, the surface level perception is oftentimes a lack of funding. While the school may offer a variety of logistical reasons if directly pressed, the district funding deficit is the problem people most frequently cite if they don't look deeper. Funding issues are real, but they are not the primary driver of this bottleneck. The fundamental problem is a capacity utilization gap. The school misallocates its existing resources. Highly capable teaching staff are trapped teaching redundant prerequisite courses instead of serving advanced needs. The faculty is there, the scheduling efficiency is not. To make things easier to understand, let's go back to the example with the science classes. There are indeed many students who are fully capable of taking AP Chemistry, AP Biology, AP Physics, or especially AP Environmental Science directly and skip the prerequisites. Because of this, the school really does not need that many sections of regular non-AP science classes, and the number of AP science sections should increase. Newton South generally has very good faculty, but many of their teaching slots are tied up in redundant foundational courses. Instead, those exact same slots could be used to teach more AP courses to the talented student body that already goes there. Now let's look at a subsurface impact or implication. This system doesn't just frustrate ambitious students, it also actively exacerbates hidden inequalities. The first is the financial gap. Because the school blocks early AP access, motivated students are forced to self-study. Imposing heavy AP limitations will not entirely lower competition among students. It frequently just moves the competition elsewhere. Wealthier families can simply hire private tutors or external programs to help bypass or at the very least mitigate the systemic problem. This effectively privatizes academic advancement and leaving lower income families systemically disadvantaged. The second hidden issue is the information gap. Think about the administrative logic here. If a school implements a deliberate blockade preventing freshmen or sophomores from taking APs, they might have little incentive to actually explain how the AP ecosystem works to those same students. If they did, it would probably just raise frustrating questions from the students actively being blocked from taking them. This deliberate blockade somewhat contributes to a massive communication gap. As a result, a lot of early high schoolers at Newton South are underexposed and lack a basic understanding of how these AP courses function, or that self-studying is even an option. The system inadvertently heavily privileges students who arrive with external insider knowledge on how to navigate the academic bureaucracy early on. This is what I will explain more in just a moment. The third and perhaps most damaging is the maturity gap. During adolescence, executive functioning varies widely due to natural biological and neurological development. This rigid framework inadvertently exacerbates the already unfair nature of that variance. For early bloomers, the system creates a somewhat unfair advantage that helps them stand out even more than what they otherwise would have. Conversely, it heavily penalizes late bloomers who are denied early academic exposure. To make things easier to understand, let's go back to that self-studying APs thing. If you're an early bloomer, you're more likely to do research and successfully self-study APs starting early in high school when everyone is blocked from taking them. Whereas in a less restrictive high school, everyone can just jump into APs early on in high school if they wish to. From here, it's not hard to see that at a restrictive high school, the achievement gap artificially widens over time. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that there is a dangerous masking effect here which makes it harder for the general public to notice this problem. People often look at the group of several dozen students per year going to elite universities, many of whom happen to be those early bloomers, and act as if there is not a problem, thinking the system is quote unquote working. But you cannot just look at that small group alone. There are so many students who could have handled higher level classes but were unfairly restricted from doing so and also did not get to self-study simply because they did not mature early enough. Remember, those suppressed students far outnumber the elite acceptances. Logically, some of those suppressed students could have in theory achieved more than what they actually did so and also potentially been accepted into the better schools had they received fair access to advanced courses and treatment during high school. What I personally find somewhat distressing is that there are so many people, including alumni, who are negatively affected by this problem, and yet they don't even seem to have realized that the school system has made it harder for them to reach their full potential. For some, the system has either damaged or suppressed their future, or made their path so much harder than what they otherwise would have been. Ultimately, this architecture creates a devastating timeline for so many students. 3 years of suppression can potentially lead directly to what I call AP backloading, forcing some of the more ambitious students into an extreme schedule overload during their senior year. It causes massive overload burnout and breaks the ideal educational experience. For example, I know a student who took AP Physics C Mechanics, AP Chemistry, AP Biology, AP Calculus, and AP Statistics all during their senior year, which is just crazy. That student could have easily spread things out more and taken some of them earlier if the school was better designed. Some people might claim that this does not negatively impact students because their oversimplified reasoning is that colleges only judge you based on what your school offers. The practical reality is far different. Students suffer a massive passive penalty. When those applications go out, admissions committees are comparing New and South students against an elite national and regional pool. A committee, which may carry implicit biases, will generally favor a student who provides undeniable proof of advanced learning over speculating on what a restricted student could have theoretically achieved. A major concern often associated with these reforms is the fear that allowing younger students into APs will cause the school's high average test scores and pass rates to drop. Whether this is an active internal priority or just an underlying hesitation, we need to remember a crucial fact. In Massachusetts, public high school funding is completely disconnected from average AP scores. Therefore, prioritizing the protection of a statistical average over fair, equitable education is a fundamental ethical flaw. Furthermore, given how highly capable the student body is, that concern is largely baseless anyway. In fact, if the school reconfigures this correctly and in a controlled manner, average scores will not substantially decrease. They might even go up. Right now, the blockade forces some students to take whatever APs are left as an option during junior year, even if they are not passionate about the subject. The senior year logjam, as discussed earlier, is where a lot of unhealthy cramming takes place. By lowering the logjam and giving students real choices across 4 years, they will study more subjects they actually care about, reducing burnout and potentially improving overall performance. We also must acknowledge the massive technological shift happening right now. We are firmly in the age of AI, and modern AI-based learning tools have fundamentally expanded access to complex academic material, acting as personalized 24/7 tutors and drastically reducing reliance on office hours or expensive private help. This means that students currently have access to 24/7 affordable learning tools, which can very much help with AP preparation. Now, it is absolutely critical that students learn how to struggle through problems and do things themselves first to build foundational skills. However, education and the broader professional world are rapidly adapting to these tools. Realizing that motivated students can progress faster than ever before, we have to find an integration balance. While this high school's restrictive scheduling architecture was constructed when modern AI was not a factor, refusing to adapt to this change means the school is artificially holding students back in a rapidly evolving world. Here's the good news. This is entirely solvable. It does not require an immediate operating override or an impossible influx of cash. It requires logical, structural reconfiguration. I might upload a few more follow-up videos where I focus on specific departments or possible solutions. Some of the specific solutions include decoupling these prerequisites from AP courses, safely eliminating age-based gatekeeping, and optimizing the master schedule. If the school claims that flexible scheduling is too logistically difficult, they can simply learn from peer districts who already do this successfully. But even if that takes time, there are immediate workarounds, like redesigning the existing win blocks to host advanced classes. If you are interested, I also highly suggest reading the comprehensive investigative report I wrote about this. It is linked in the description below, so please check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you later.